This is Criteria.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras here with my co-host James Majewski. Welcome back, James.
Hello, Thomas. Thank you. Good to be back.
Yeah, James has been in Poland for a couple of weeks with an actors workshop. How was that?
It was awesome. Yeah, I don't really know where to begin. It was with this kind of relatively obscure Polish theater company that has a very unique way of working. So it was just long days, 9-10 hour days for 2 weeks straight. But good to be back in the city. Good to be back, of course, with my family, and good to be back here doing the work.
All right, here we go. The work. So we've never discussed any Chinese language cinema before on this podcast. You know, we spent all that time going through the Vatican film list, which did not include any Chinese language films. We're going to be talking about a relatively recent film from 1991, which is considered one of the greatest works of Taiwanese and indeed Chinese language cinema in general, called A Brighter Summer Day by Edward Yang. And this film had a different title in the original Chinese, but I don't want to say it because it's kind of the original title is kind of a spoiler. Maybe we'll talk about that later. The English title, A Brighter Summer Day, is refers to a lyric from an Elvis song that is played in the movie. So it's more of a vibe than anything that tells you about the plot.
Yeah.
You know?
I went into this film not knowing anything about the plot or indeed the director or the particular provenance of this film. I just went in total tabula rasa, and it was a trip, let me tell you. The movie's also 4 hours long.
Right, yeah, good point.
Apparently there are 3 other cuts, I think.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's one that's 2 hours. I don't know what that's like, but this 4 hour epic is just that. It's an experience, and I wonder how we'll handle some of the plot elements. Maybe we'll sort of bifurcate this episode with a spoiler warning for anybody, who doesn't want to have the film's plot totally spoiled before their first viewing. But
it's a neat experience going through the story of this film because it's very carefully plotted. The way that it develops is very subtle, very organic, and when you first start watching it, you don't really know what it's going to be about or where it's going to be going. It just feels like a slice of life. It feels like it just could be about anything, really. I mean, not about anything, but it kind of feels like it's just showing you the picture of this world.
Sure.
And then at a certain point, you realize where everything has been kind of going. But it deals with a lot of different things. And now I should not forget to introduce our guest today, a friend of ours that we met about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. Our friend Frank Yan, who also lives here in the city, works in the film world as well. And so I'll go ahead and welcome in. Frank, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. My name is Frank Yan. So I'm mostly working as the film programmer here in the city. I have my own film festival called the Cinematography Film Festival. It's a film festival that centers around Chinese language cinema, Chinese diaspora cinema, and so on and so forth. But I also do other works for distribution, for soundtrack label. But just overall, I'm a big film fan, and I'm a Catholic myself, so I've been listening to Criteria for a while now. I'm really appreciate the work that you guys are doing here. So I'm really glad to be here to discuss A Brighter Summer Day with you guys, which is probably one of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah, we said a little bit about this film just as an epic and as a film with a lot going on in the plot. But, I don't really know anything about Taiwanese cinema, and I know very little about Chinese cinema. So, Frank, I don't even know what questions to ask, so I'll just tell you, can you tell us what we need to know that we don't even know we need to know about, this scene and this director and the background of this movie?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very interesting period when the film was made. The film was made in early 90s, between late 80s and early 90s. it's a period in Taiwan. It's a period of changing. At the time, so the film begins with this title cards, introduce a little bit about the backgrounds, about the history of Taiwan, and when the story was taking place. It was after 1949, after the KMT, the Nationalist Party, lost the civil war in China and escaped to the island of Taiwan, which is located in the southeast of China. And they starting their own regime, starting their basically become a independent states in reality, even though they claim they're still like China and all that, and that still all the way till today about the issue of Taiwan. But specifically for this film, when the film was made at the time, so after KMT take control of Taiwan and starting to build this own island nation, it quickly went into this authoritarian state because they want to, eliminate any communist influence and infiltration from the mainland China by, was governed by the Communist Party. So under this excuse, the ruling party and its leader, Chiang Kai-shek, declared a martial law throughout the whole island. And this martial law status basically existed all the way up till the end of 1980s when Chiang Kai-shek died and his son, Jiang Jingguo, took the power and became the leader of the nation. And then throughout a series of democratic movement and government scandals and pressures from the United States, because at the time, Taiwan was still like an ally of the United States, that pressures finally the government to drop the martial law and to start in this transition to a liberal democratic society and government institution. And finally, by the year 1996, there's this general election was held, and this was the first time that election and a nationwide election was held, and a president was elected, and so on and so forth. And by the year 2000, that was the first time the KMT lost power to the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is the more island-based. They advocate more for independent Taiwan instead of a more China-focused Taiwan. So the film was made right after martial law was dropped. And that's the political and social background of this film. But in terms of Taiwanese cinema, this film also is the pinnacle of the so-called Taiwanese New Wave, or someone called Taiwanese New Cinema. It was this film movement started in early 1980s by this new generation of filmmakers who coming out of film school, or in this case, Edward Yan, who studied film in the United States. Coming back to Taiwan to making movies, which are very different from the previous film, because obviously under the authoritarian regime, most of the films that they made have to align with the government message, what they called a healthy realism. It's the dominant the film style before Taiwanese New Cinema. I don't know if that's the correct English translation, but that's what it means in the Chinese. Healthy realism, sort of like akin to the, Soviets kind of, social realism kind of style, that trying to do sort of a realistic films about daily life that had the emphasis on Chinese identity instead of the Taiwanese identity. And so most of the films made before 1980s are there in Mandarin instead of the Hakka or the Taiwanese dialect. So that's like one of the difference between that. And also another difference is that they also absorb other new wave movement around the world, like French New Wave, German New Wave, Italian New Cinema, Neo-Realism cinema, that they starting to make films outside the studio system, making their own stuff, trying to come up with new things. Very exciting. And obviously Edward Yan is one of the most prominent member that comes from this movement. And there's also another filmmaker called Xiao Si'r. I think Nathan mentioned him.
Yeah, he did
in
the
the
Flowers
past
of Shanghai,
podcast.
right?
Flowers of Shanghai. Yeah, that's actually a later work from a relatively later work, but it's still its 90s. Because Hou Xiaoxian and Edward Yang, they started making film in the early 80s and really created this very unique style of filmmaking and influenced tons of other filmmakers that came after them, whether it's from China or all over the world. So I would say that's pretty much is the background of this film that you know if you're interested to know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, because yeah, it does help to situate the artistic and cultural political context that this film is coming out of. But you know what's funny is that even going in as a total ignoramus, I feel like the film does such a good job of conveying what you need to know, and it's not so much in specific historical facts as it is in a kind of mood that's created. This political turmoil exists very much. It's woven into the fabric of the film. It's always in the background. So, you know, there might be tanks coming down the road, or soldiers, weapons, secret police. But there's also a kind of angst that exists not just among the children, who are the sort of primary subject of this film, but also among the adults, you know, and this dissatisfaction at work, or you know, missing relatives, or there's just so much texture in this specifically Taiwanese historical moment that comes through, even if you don't know the details. And this is just one example of, I think, you know, how sort of masterfully crafted the film is. For a 4-hour long film, there's a great economy of images and text and moments. You know, nothing is really wasted. But maybe I'm taking us a little far afield.
The more specific plot of this film has to do with, as you said, school children, for the most part, and the kind of main character is let's see if I'm saying it right. His name is I think Xiao Si'r, but he's referred to as Zhang Zhen by someone else in the movie. Go ahead.
So it's very interesting because in China usually you have an official name and then you have like a nickname that called by your family or friends. So in this case, Xiao Si'r literally means little four because he's number 4.
Oh, okay.
The 4th children in the family. And also very interesting, the name Zhang Zhen actually is the name of the actor himself too, as well. And that's also a kind of a common thing in filmmaking, that people just, when it's hard to come up with a name, they just use the names of the actors.
Great.
Or some adaptation. And also very interesting is that the actor who plays her and the father, they are actually father and son in real life.
Yeah, there's a great on-screen chemistry between the father and the son, and so I wasn't surprised at all afterwards to find out that they were actually father and son. But I was surprised to find out that this actor who plays Sir, you know, in this film, he's, you know, maybe like 14 years old or something. Well, I was first introduced to him in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, he's like the
he's the tiger.
Yeah, Dark Cloud
So he's a bit older than that. Okay.
He is. He's probably in his 20s, you know.
Okay.
But he's kind of like this bandit and this love interest.
Okay, interesting. I'll have to go back, and I saw that for the first time last year, so I'll have to go back.
Oh man,
and look
that
at
movie's so good.
But yeah, and this was his first role. Yeah.
Yes.
And so he's kind of the main character, and we see him in the context of his family and the context of school and the context of youth gangs that are emerging. I guess a sort of there's these two main rival gangs, and one of them is children of like native-born Chinese Taiwanese, and one of them is children of Chinese who fled to Taiwan.
It's explicitly emphasis on one of the gangs, the 217 gangs. And that's because they are based on this military dependence village, or in Chinese called Juncun, which is this big residency complex that built after the KMT went to Taiwan, and specifically for the relatives of the soldiers and other military personnel that came from China that lived in this almost kind of a independent neighborhood. But from his side, I mean, he himself, his parents are from China as well. So, it's not like that black and white, when it comes to the makeup of those gangs, but there's definitely some sentiments of this kind of outsiders and the local people, and this kind of conflict between those two peoples are very prevalent, I would
So
say.
Xiao Si'r is and his older brother are getting involved in the Little Park gang, right? And then the rival gang is the 217.
Yeah, and so this sort of creates the kind of two centers of action in the plot. On the one hand, there's what's going on the street between these two gangs, and Si'r is sort of being sort of initiated into this kind of lifestyle gradually throughout the film. And then on the other hand, there's what's going on at home. The film opens with Si'r has ostensibly done very poorly on a test. I think it was a math test or something.
Yeah.
And his father is at the school advocating for him. Like, my son has always been a good student. There must be some sort of mistake. So that really frames the sort of central predicament of the film, which is what's going to happen to Si'r and his father's concern for him, and sort of the drama that's taking place at home.
And what happens at the beginning is he gets put in night school.
Night school, yes.
Which is a kind of a decisive, thing for his fate in
Right.
terms of the types of kids he's going to be interacting with, the amount of supervision that he has from his family.
So
like
right
that.
away when the film starts, I'm thinking about like any number of coming of age movies that our viewers would be familiar with. So I'm thinking about like Stand By Me or even like The Sandlot or something. There's funny moments with these kids, and also another sort of hallmark of this age is that there's like a wide disparity in terms of relative sizes and maturities. Some guys are looking like James Dean and others are looking like
small children.
Yeah, little squirts,
Yeah.
But then quickly things start to take this kind of crime drama turn, because and then I start thinking about films like, oh gee, what was that movie with Tom Cruise and what was it, maybe
The Outsiders?
Yeah. Or even like West Side Story or things like this,
Yeah, juvenile delinquency.
Yeah, right. So this is another kind of genre familiar that people might recognize,
Yeah.
But of course, for a 4-hour film, there's a lot more that's getting woven in here.
Yeah, and a really central point is his friendship with this girl Ming,
Yes.
who is or was sort of ambiguously the girlfriend of the leader of the Little Park gang, Honey. But Honey has been away for a while. He fled town after, I think, killing the leader of the 217s, potentially over this girl.
Sure.
And so he starts hanging out with this girl, and that's sort of one of the things that starts getting him in trouble with these gangs, because everybody's saying you shouldn't be hanging out with her because she's Honey's girl, and people are acting on Honey's behalf even though Honey's away. And then
so there's even a little bit of like a Romeo and Juliet thing going on here. Not that Ming, this love interest, is a part of a rival gang or anything, but there is this kind of star-crossed lovers aspect to it, with the gang warfare going on in the background.
Yeah.
Have we done a good job on the plot summary, Frank, or is there anything you want to add?
That's pretty good. Yeah, I think it's so far so good.
Yeah, so like it's hard to I don't want to go too far ahead even with that relationship yet, because I mean there's a lot that they're all these plot things are kind of interconnected too, Another thing we can say about the structure of the film is that I think we watched like the first 3 hours and then we took a break and then watched the rest, something like that. And at a certain point, the gang story kind of fades mostly into the background after there's kind of like a climax to that story. And then Xiao Si'r's father starts being more of a protagonist as well, because he's being interrogated about some of his connections with a Chinese professor who had come to Taiwan and then returned to China. And I guess there's some implication that, that professor may be suspected of having communist leanings or something like that, something that is politically incorrect under this regime in Taiwan. And so this is threatening, at the very least, threatening the father's career prospects, if nothing else. So yeah, it's another important point.
But sort of in addition to that, I think the story becomes much more about Si'r and his family and what's going to happen to him. The story sort of becomes more personal, maybe,
and kind of like the stress that's being put on this family, on the not only because of Si'r getting in trouble and his older brother Lao, who's already in the more involved in the gangs, getting in trouble, but the stress being put directly on the father by the government.
Right.
Yeah. The first thing I noticed about this film is actually these long takes. And you mentioned the scene where the father is in the school advocating for his son. I think in that shot, we kind of see it through a doorway for a long time. We just see the father. We don't see who he's talking to. So the film does a lot of different things with angles, and sometimes we see a character's face. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes it'll do close up on faces, but just as often it'll be a long shot, or it'll be, they're turned away or something like that, or you only see one of the characters, or even you're hearing things that are happening off camera, and we're just looking at a room for a moment. And then the other thing that I immediately noticed on first viewing, and then again when I saw it the second time, is actually the sound. I don't really know how to describe it in technical terms, but I just noticed the sound feels very kind of real. I don't know if some of it is actually like on location sound or what, but I don't know. Can you say anything about that, Frank, in terms of why the sound is a little bit distinctive?
Yeah, I think actually that's, I would describe as one of the characteristics throughout the whole Taiwanese new cinema, or even till this day, is that they really put an emphasis on sound design and how using sound design to tell a story, whether it's to heighten sound or using a more realistic approach. And this all have to do with this sound editor named Du Duzhi, who's basically right now holds this legendary sound guy in the Chinese language cinema, that he really did a lot of contribution in terms of how to mold the soundscape.
I would describe it as just feeling quite real, and like kind of the room sound is very evident, and even if just like somebody, pulling a chair, or different those kinds of sounds kind of pop out.
When I was in the woods in Poland one morning, I was just listening to my surroundings, and I was kind of struck by all of these layers of sounds of insects and birdsong and wind, and just what a work of art nature is. And I was thinking about how, art aspires to these different conditions of nature, and that this I mentioned the word textured earlier, but it could also be applied here in a different sense. This like textured quality of lots of layers that come together and create a kind of density, a dense beauty. That was what I was thinking about when the film began, because, yes, there are these long takes, but there's so much that's taking place, and the soundscape is part of that. There's all this activity, in different scenes of kind of just life going on, and so there's a real sense of a healthy realism, you might say. But when I say it, I mean this textured, sort of many layers, dense representation. And what's nice about that is that there's so much to grab onto, and the long takes really give you an opportunity to do that. To rest in a particular sound or a particular activity or a particular image, and then that's when these sort of poetic elements begin to be evoked. So in describing the film so far, I hope it's clear that this is like an entertaining film. It's a very engaging story. And it's a movie that I think, most anybody could sit down and enjoy. But it's also got this kind of art house poetry to it, and I think that's owing to this density.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to talk about the character of Xiao Si'r, because especially for a viewer like me, not totally understanding the cultural and social context, a lot of what I end up grabbing onto is his character and his personality and the way that he is responding to the pressures that he's feeling. We're told that he is normally a good student, and we get a sense of his character early on when one of the gang members sitting next to him in class demands that he let him copy the test results, the test answers, and he refuses. And the gang member then, attacks him for that, and he stands up for himself. So we get a sense that he has a sense of honesty and honor to some extent. We also see him stealing a flashlight from a film studio early on, which accompanies him through the entire film, basically. But for the most part, we see him having this sense of fairness, which is emphasized when he finally meets Honey, and there's this. They seem to have this shared sense of honor. Ming actually describes, before Honey ever appears, Ming describes Honey as having this sense of justice and fairness that she always, tells him is exaggerated, or that he's causing problems with this sort of sense of justice. And that conflict between Ming and and Honey, or Ming and Xiao Si'r, in that aspect of their personalities, is very key one for the film as well. But I think that's one of the things that's the thing that allows us to connect with Xiao Si'r, who is kind of a quiet guy who maybe is getting into trouble throughout the film. He's a bit stoic. But we see him in this very relatable and sympathetic position with the test scenario earlier in the film. I think that immediately gives us something to grab onto about his character, then follow his development and how that character trait affects him in good and bad ways throughout the story.
Yeah, his story line is kind of the universalizing element of the film, because who doesn't understand this coming of age kind of quagmire that he's in the midst of, with first loves and bad kids that you shouldn't be hanging out with and trouble at home. You mentioned this instance where he doesn't let him cheat on the test. Well, he gets in trouble anyway, because the guy does cheat, and so they're both called in because their answers were exactly the same, even their mistakes were the same. And we find out actually that Si'r purposefully got some questions wrong, sort of to, basically to highlight that this guy was cheating on him. Anyway, they both get in trouble. And his father again comes to the school to try to advocate for his son, saying, this isn't fair. He didn't do anything wrong. And his father frames that as the need to insist on principles. He says, you can't apologize for something that you haven't done. And his father actually ends up getting Si'r into even more trouble than he had been in to begin with.
Right. So we see his father has this same trait.
Yes.
Of sort of a stubborn insistence on fairness.
But this kind of predicament, this one that's very relatable, creates a parallel with the problem that's happening politically. That's perhaps much more particular. And so when we see his father called in to an interrogation with the secret police, and kind of put into this helpless position that his son occupies with these, pretty authoritarian schoolmasters, there's a kind of there's a parallel there, and so there are certain themes that come to the fore, and also certain problems that begin to arise, right? Because now, where are his principles when he's with the secret police, or when he's back home later after he's released? Sir's older brother takes the heat for something that Sir has done. And we have this long scene of his father basically beating Sir's older brother because of something that his older brother didn't do. He literally apologizes for something that he didn't do, So there are all these kind of questions of authority that are running through the film, beginning with this sort of key relatable aspect of just being a kid who has to navigate all of these different authority figures, whether at home or in school or in your own sort of circle of friends, right? In the gang and whatever else.
Yeah.
And I think that, as a Westerner sort of looking in on the outside, what I'm surmising is, okay, here is a kind of extended consideration on this problem of authority and what happens when authority is either absent or is, perverted, when there are no principles that are undergirding this authority. What other things sort of step into the breach? So these are all the kind of considerations that I think the film is asking you to make as you're navigating all these different situations.
Yeah, I think the depiction of Sir and his father, to some extent, I think they are all like very typical characters that from this so-called Chinese intellectual background. That because his father, I think, was worked with like in the government, is definitely an intellectual, and had this Confucian sort of values in terms of educations. That the first and foremost thing to teach your kids is to follow the moral principle. That's like beyond anything. Like because I remember when I was taught, it's like your moral character that went above your like academic and everything else. Like you need to be a good person first and everything else. So I think that's pretty much aligned with like the traditional Chinese family teachings. And I think you made a good point about how this films had these themes on how to deal with authority or the absence of authority. Because, like I said, this film was made right after the drop of the martial law in Taiwan, and there's a lot of so that gave the freedom to the filmmakers to starting to delve into some of the topics that are previously tabooed or censored in Taiwan society, and to reflect on the kind of trauma that the Taiwanese people went through in those kind of period. And I think that's definitely a very important theme throughout the film. And I also would think that the character arc of Xiao Si'r, it's a very interesting one, because I would argue that it's basically one of the theme is the death of idealism and idealist. Because we see, like you mentioned about how the father changed after he got interrogated, because we see this in contrast. There's two scenes, both when the father was summoned to the school, when Sir was in trouble. And like the first time, he trying to advocate for his son, saying that, no, you are doing this unfair. We need to have principle, we need to have justice. And then the second time after he was interrogated and all that, he became much less hostile and much less, principled, and just become this really agreeable guy. Yeah, just say, yeah, sure, that we can see that, situation that really just broke him.
Yeah.
And I think that's that transformation of the father figure contributed to a lot for what happened eventually with Xiao Si'r.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And just one more observation on the general like social situation. One thing that struck me is, yeah, okay, this is a martial law, supposedly authoritarian society, and yet these kids don't really have that much. I mean, sure, they have strict schoolmasters, but the schoolmasters admit that they're not in control of the kids.
Yeah.
And they're just running around going crazy on the street. They're killing each other, in some instances. And actually, there's not that much supervision, at least for these night school kids. So it's striking how there can be authoritarianism and, strictness in one area, but maybe that the pressure that puts on the parents actually harms their ability to actually look after their children. I don't know if that's part of it as well, but the film does in the titles somewhere mention this social unease that the parents feel that infects the children as well, and causes them to search for this kind of identity and gang behavior. So
yeah, the title card at the beginning sort of specifically frames it that way, that the proliferation of these street gangs is precisely because of the insecurity caused by the parents' worries about the future.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can say, one or two more general things about the film, and then we can give a big spoiler alert and move into talking a little bit more concretely about where this film ends up and kind of what happens. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Cool.
Sure.
So something I wanted to say, if we haven't quite touched on it yet, is that this film is wonderfully shot. I right away, I was just so amazed by how beautiful almost every single shot is. And it seems like somehow he's able to, just such a great eye, able to find like every angle, most interesting or distinct angle that you could find in any given situation.
Yeah.
All these, there's so many scenes that have such a different character to them, beginning with this visual character, but it really supports what I was describing earlier about this density, because you've got all these different layers, you've got all these different characters, right? I mean, the film introduces us to a lot of different people and really fleshes them out. Nobody's really kind of on the sidelines. So if it's the young doctor at the school, or the sort of shop owner where they get their groceries, or, one of the other kids at school, there's so many different characters, and they're all interweaving together. We see them in different circumstances with one another. How one seemingly unrelated character later impacts another one.
One example of, just taking the time with these quiet moments to illuminate someone's character is when the head of the 217 gang is introduced, and they're in the pool hall, and he is just, I don't remember if this is the first scene with him or not, but there's just a scene where he's sitting there, eating or drinking or something, and there's these candles next to him, and everything's being done for him. We just see this guy, the lights keep going out, and so the guy keeps having to relight the candles, and we see him kind of reacting to things, but kind of in this very complacent way. I mean, there's another guy off screen being, just mildly tortured, I guess, because he owes money.
Kind of roughed up.
Kind of roughed up, yeah. And we just see him sitting at the pool table with this big heap of food, on the pool table, eating his food. It just tells you something about that character.
For sure. And at the beginning of the film, it can be a little disorienting at first, because you're not really sure, who am I really supposed to be invested in? Who am I really supposed to be following here? Because the film does such a good job of getting close to seemingly everyone that you're introduced to. But that's just one example of the many layers. We've also sort of mentioned there are these layers of genres even within here, and layers certainly of themes, and that's so supported by how visually spectacular this film is, with each scene having such a unique character to it in the way that it's shot, so carefully framed. I think that this was sort of like a standout feature of the film for me. I wanted to make sure that we mentioned it.
Yeah, and also it contributes to the film's tastefulness in its handling of like violence, for instance.
Yes.
You know, very visually interesting, but the most violent and bloody moment in the film takes place mostly in darkness with just little flashes of, you know, flashlight
Yes.
because the power's out. It's this rainy, dark scene.
Yes.
And the gang is literally going after the other gang with samurai swords in this like totally unexpected ambush massacre.
My gosh.
And they just run in there and butcher these guys with samurai swords, and it's really intense, but it's mostly in sort of darkness and chaos. And so a similar thing is done with the, you know, scenes where the kids are going off in the dark and kissing or hooking up. It's kind of like the way it's framed and the way that everything's kind of dark and the kind of like the minimalism even of just the sort of the choreography of it or whatever you want to say.
Sure, well, there isn't like a kind of gloss that's being put over
Right.
it. It's not being made like sexy, you know, it's kind of just, there's a restraint, but also a kind of honesty. I like this healthy realism term. I think I'm going to take it.
Yeah, I think that the way that he depicted violence and other stuff, I think was also, I would say it's in relation with the storytelling here, because I think it can be looked as this kind of symbolism that, you know, even though there's violence happening, they are usually, because under the circumstances, under the social environment, they are being swept away. They're trying to be covered up. They're the dark corner of the society at the time that the mainstream society, they don't want to recognize them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and there's also the aesthetic choice is like, especially like the gang war, the climatic gang war that you mentioned. I think there's also this kind of, especially with the rain, that's kind of sort of a tradition in Chinese action film to having action taking place in a big rain. Like we saw this in multiple examples in Hong Kong action films, in Taiwanese action film, and you know, especially the way that they put the costume with the bamboo hat, that part really looks like a martial art film.
Yeah, and it really,
because they've got like the what you would call it, the
raincoat,
they're wearing, and
right. Yeah, it really catches you by surprise, as so much of the violence does. You know, the first act of violence I think that we see is this punishment of this you know, rival gang kid that's been on their turf. And so they kind of rough him up, and then one of the gang leaders hits him with a brick, I think, you know. It you know, sounds pretty brutal. And you know, it is. The kid definitely is, you know, worse for wear. But as far as the violence in the film goes, this is very tame compared to where some acts of violence end up later. And so I think, you know, the violence in here really has this quality of, there's like an escalation that happens throughout the film, and you see how the violence is beginning to affect the children who are involved, in particular, Sir. But then it also has this quality of catching you off guard almost every single time it happens, because there's this non sequitur. It's like, oh, but these are sweet kids, you know, like these are just schoolboys. What is going on? So this is I think another remarkable thing worth remarking on.
Yeah, I think that's the way that Edward Yang portrays violence. It's usually that he doesn't really want to show like the whole process of violence. He just want to show you the result, the end result, and usually it comes very fast, and like you said, caught you off guard, and very sudden, and then show you the result. And I think in this way that he, you know, creates a more impactful way of the depiction of violence.
Yeah, and again, there isn't like a gloss put on it. It's not glorified or made attractive. Really, it hits you.
Okay,
and,
spoiler warning?
Yeah, with that, maybe we should move into spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen this film and everything that we're talking about is getting you really interested and sounds like the kind of film you might want to see, I definitely recommend that you pause this discussion now, go watch it, come back to us 4 hours later, and we'll continue the discussion. But I think in order to dig deep into some of the things that we've brought up, it will be helpful to talk about where this film ends up, and in particular, its final moments.
Yeah, well, I want to talk a little bit about the character of Ming. Ming, they kind of, I guess they kind of meet by happenstance, Xiao Si'r and Ming, in the school, doctor's office. And they just kind of end up hanging out, playing hooky. And at first, it's not totally like a romance at first. They're kind of hanging out. We don't get the sense that he has a possessive feeling towards her at first. But the problem is that he keeps taking heat from the gang for hanging out with her, because everybody thinks that they're more involved than they are at the very beginning.
Well, he's just getting progressively romantically involved,
right?
So at the beginning, they're not on a date, they're not boyfriend and girlfriend, but they are kind of playing hooky together and spending the afternoon together. And so this is usually how these things begin, you know?
Yeah.
So, even if everybody else is saying, oh, look, you're a couple, and he's saying, no, we're not. Well, it's a little thin when you just spent the whole afternoon with her playing hooky. You know?
He starts out saying he wants to avoid trouble.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add up a little. I think because personally, I think Sir already always had a crush on her. But I think the progression of their relationship has also a lot thing to do with his own circumstances. That ends up that Ming become almost the only thread that keep him together.
Yeah.
Like after Honey's death, after the father figure is collapsed, then Ming become almost like he's only the thing that held him together to be a good students, to be good boys. And then when Ming finally betrayed him, that's the last straw.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think maybe one of the things that's appealing about Ming too is she comes off at first, she's very quiet. She comes off as being innocent. She comes off as being in need of protection. The very first time they meet, it's because she's hurt her knee, and the doctor asks him to help walk her back to class.
Right.
Another thing that we learn about her early on is because they hang out at this film studio next to the school, and the director of the film sees her and wants her to do a screen test, and we see her doing her screen test, and she is very good. She's able to cry on command. Now, this comes a cut right after her mom has suffered a terrible asthma attack, and so she's genuinely sad. But we also see that she has an ability to call those things and use those things and to act.
Yes.
And so we also see there's more to this girl.
Yeah. There's a little bit of the femme fatale about her.
Yes, I totally agree.
Because she appears very kind of naive or innocent, or a damsel who needs a man, but then we kind of gradually come to find out that she's a brazen hussy.
And maybe the first indication of that is when she is talking to Xiao Si'r about Honey and saying, Honey is very idealistic, and I always tell him, not to be. But, what we find out is actually she's a deeply cynical, a girl. And maybe that comes from, we don't get the sense that she has a father in her life.
Right.
Yes.
Her mother's sick.
Yes, because I think her father died when she was very young, possibly during the war.
I see.
And only came to Taiwan with her mother. And her mother also has asthma, and so is also very weak. Needs for protection. So I think the character of Ming is really a very interesting character throughout the whole film. Is that because I think that her character sort of represent Taiwan, part of, at least I was saying, part of Taiwan at the time, that they are in exile. They are trying to survive in this very tumultuous world. And they don't know what to do. So the only thing they can do is to find whoever the strongest rely on to protect them.
Yeah.
And I think that's also contributed to why she did so good doing that screen test, because I think her upbringing that made her very much more mature than her peers in her age to learn how to adapt to different situations to survive in this world. And I think that's contributed a lot so that's why I think it really her character is sort of at least I think partially a representation of Taiwan at the time.
Yeah, because they have to keep moving in with other people. When her mother loses a job, they have to go live with somebody else. And then she sort of has all these boyfriends that end up not sticking around. Like Honey was her previous boyfriend, and he's been gone. So there's this lack of security even there. So I don't want to be unsympathetic to her.
Yeah.
But
I mean, just the thing about the femme fatale is that, like, they actually do need protection. Like, that's why they have to act innocent and manipulative. They do need, like, the male hero in these noirs to help them and protect them in certain situations, even if they turn out to have tricks up their sleeve, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so what strikes me is that she has this cynical view, perhaps precisely because of lacking, like, a stable, like, male father, protector figure in her life. And she's had to rely on just all these other people and to give them what they want in different ways. And it makes me think, too, I just watched the movie Stromboli by Rossellini, and the Ingrid Bergman character in that movie has been a refugee. She's lived through World War II, and we get the sense that she's basically just had to do whatever she has to survive. And if that involves, getting together with various men. And the premise of the film it begins with she marries this Italian. She's stuck in a displaced persons camp in Italy, and she marries a simple, like, Italian fisherman just to get out of the camp, basically. And so her like going and trying to, like, just get whatever she can from people to survive, and that habit of, like, self-protection and using men is part of the plot, part of her character in that film. And I see something similar with Ming, somebody who has really been in a desperate situation, and suffering doesn't always make us better, and so it's created this hard shell of protection, like, beneath the vulnerable exterior, and she's actually much more hard-boiled and deeply cynical than the stoic Xiao Si'r is. And that ends up being something that he can't deal with.
Yeah, it's very film noir in that sense, and I think that one scene that jumps out to me is when the father comes back from his time being sort of basically imprisoned for several days and interrogated. And I think this is after he's released. He and his wife get into an argument, and she leaves, goes outside and kind of has a breakdown. And then he comes out to her and also begins to cry, and they hold each other and they say, we only have each other left, or something like that, or something along these lines. And later in the film, we see more drama happening at home, and Sir is outside eavesdropping, listening in on what's happening at the house. Now, the film doesn't show us this, but I think that you can kind of put two and two together and understand that maybe this dynamic between men and women of really only having one another left, this is what's modeled to Sir. This is the model that he's going off of, seeing his parents weathering a hard life, but really just having each other and putting their hope in one another. And the reason this is significant and this relationship with Ming is significant is because in the end, it does seem that he puts all of his hope in her, or in what he can be for her. And he snaps.
Right. And it's not just like his need of her in, like, a simple sense, but his need to be something for someone, and his need to be a man also,
right.
Especially in this situation where your father's been humiliated, and he wants to assert himself as a man. And Ming says at one point, I forget who she's speaking to, but she says, lots of guys say they love me, but the minute there's trouble, they run away. And that's also interesting because basically what she, at the end of the movie, what she accuses Xiao Si'r of is not being able to just accept her the way that she is, and only being interested in her insofar as he can change her or control her behavior. And while she is justifying herself and not wanting to change, there's also some truth to that. I mean, what she's been dealing with is this series of guys who, one way or another, they run away when there's trouble, whether that trouble is the threat of violence because they're involved with her, or whether the trouble is more fundamental to their relationship with her.
Yeah.
And so there's nobody who can just sort of stick it out. And Xiao Si'r arguably falls into that. Not that he should necessarily stay in a relationship with her, but that he can't just allow her to be the way that she is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what we see in the film is that he and his father both have violent reactions to a sense of unfairness or a sense of disrespect or dishonor. And I mean, should we just spoil what happens?
Yeah.
I mean, the very shocking climax is that Xiao Si'r's friend Ma has been hanging out with Ming, and he goes to the school intending with a kind of a dagger, intending to
ambush Ma, maybe. Yeah.
But instead he runs into Ming, and they have this conversation where she upbraids him for his kind of what she perceives as kind of his self-righteousness.
Yeah.
And he just, he stabs her.
Yeah.
And he kills her.
Yeah,
And
he calls her hopeless and shameless.
Yeah.
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 But the pain has as much to do with his inability to change as with hers, right? Because what has sort of precipitated this? He's been taking time away from her, really, and from like life with the gang to try to like hit the books and do right by his father again. He's disappointed his father, and he's newly motivated to be a good student and to try to please his father, basically. And he sees Sly, who had been the kind of de facto leader of the gang when Honey was absent, but who also had to, I think, kind of disappear for a while. Sly has turned it around and become basically a model kid.
And he was expelled earlier.
Yes, yeah. Right. And so this encourages him too, that people can change.
Yeah.
So you really get the impression that all this violence is taking a toll on Si'r, that he's not happy with the trajectory of his life. He's not happy with his relationship with his father and with his, relationships at home. His brother has taken the heat for something that Si'r did. And so he wants to turn his life around, but Ming is a part of that. And he wants Ming to be a part of that. And her sort of unwillingness, I think, creates a crisis for him, because it means that he won't be able to change either. And so, in this moment, he lashes out. And it's so tragic. I mean, it is the definition of this is a tragedy,
Yeah.
And this is the real life kind of circumstance that the film is based on, of a highly publicized murder of this teenage boy murdering his teenage girlfriend, and then the kind of ensuing media firestorm with the trial and his getting condemned to death, and then that sentence being commuted to 15 years. So I don't know how much else is based on that. You get the impression that there's a lot of fictionalizing going on, but this sort of central. Well, what's the film title in? It's like
the Chinese title is literally called the youth killing case in Cooling Street.
Yeah,
or something like that.
The homicide incident.
And I'm glad I didn't know that when I saw the film.
Right. Well, obviously the director doesn't think that it needs to be a surprise.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Well,
obviously,
maybe for a Taiwanese audience, it's harder to hide
right,
that this is a historical film, and you know.
right.
Yeah,
but
and also I do think that maybe because even when I first watched this film, I knew nothing about the case that this film was based upon. So when you hear a film is called The Homicide Incidents on Cooling Street, you thought this is more like a crime drama,
Yeah.
like a more genre-driven film instead of a 4 hour, period spanning epic that I think because it was mentioned in the film, the Tolstoy novel War and Peace.
yeah,
I think this film definitely took a lot of the inspirations, and it sometimes really feels like a novel with all the characters
yes,
that's
yes.
being theirs, but speaking of that ending, that he called her shameless and helpless. That's exactly the word that his father called his brother when he's beating him
Oh,
to taking the blame for him.
wow.
So in a way, he's trying to imitate or trying to
Wow.
be like you said, to assume this masculine,
Oh, man, that's
be
so
a man.
heavy.
So in a way, I think you're definitely correct to say he's not just lashing out on Ming, but also lashing out on himself to being this failure of a man who can't control everything. And like Ming said explicitly, like I'm just like the world. The world won't change because of you. And I think that's like that's like basically like the whole tragedy. What it's about is this kind of a inability of man against the world that surrounded him.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And he says to her, "I'm the only hope you have left," in that last
Yeah.
scene. And
Yeah,
then ends
dude,
up killing
it's
him.
so heavy. This film is really haunting. I was only able to watch it once, given its length. I would have liked to have watched it again because it really stayed with me. You know, I found myself like not able to sleep just thinking about the movie at night. And there's so many kind of echoes throughout the film. The film is bookended by these radio broadcasts that are sort of announcing all of the sort of exceptional students of the year, moving on to these higher level classes or whatever. There's totems that kind of reemerge. You mentioned the flashlight that's stolen at the beginning, and that actually Si'r returns at the end of the film, before going to ambush Ma. And so there's a lot of different threads that come full circle, and this relationship with the father is so much like that. You really see how this father, has every good intention for his son, is also failing his son. It would be very easy to make a film where bad father equals bad kid, and it's not that it's not that simple. It's more complicated than that, because this father really wants what's best for his son, but for whatever reason isn't giving it to him. Maybe he's putting, too much emphasis on school, or maybe he's, too bound up in his job security, or, maybe it's any number of things. But the sort of failure, the breakdown of communication, really, that kind of is occurring between the father and the son, where you can see that this son is a reflection of the father, is taking on a lot of his virtues and a lot of his vices.
Even when the scene where the son hits the teacher with a baseball bat because his father's being humiliated, basically.
Right.
And the son and the father are talking afterwards, and the son, he kind of apologizes, but the father doesn't really say.
Well, the father's defeated at this point,
he's defeated,
too.
and he says, if I stop smoking, we can afford to buy you glasses. But he doesn't really deal with the issue. He doesn't say, son, we have to work on this.
Yes. Well,
this anger.
And what does Si'r say? He says, I was basically doing what you did last time. Last time it was his father who stood up to this guy and sort of chewed him out, and then got them in trouble. Well, this time he wasn't doing that. This time the father was kind of like a dog with his tail between his legs because in part of this experience with the secret police. And so his son steps in, and does what he saw modeled by his father. But of course, this is twisted and perverted. So one of the things that makes it so tragic is that some of even the good qualities of the father are twisted.
I think that's why you can call it a tragedy, because we sympathize with so much of Xiao Si'r's character, and then we see how it gets twisted and leads him to this terrible act.
Yes.
That he didn't. I mean, he was anticipating violence, but he wasn't anticipating this particular act of violence.
Right.
And I also think that looking at it from a Catholic perspective, maybe it's easier to see it as a tragedy than as him just becoming a monster in the end, because I don't know, somebody else watching it today might think, well, what's wrong? Like, why should he, is he slut shaming Ming, or like, what's the problem with what she's doing? She should be herself and he should let him be herself. And again, it's true, he shouldn't try to control other people, but like there is like a genuine like thing for his like sense of like uprightness to be offended at, even though he responds wrongly. And so I think that like we do sympathize with like when she says I'm like the world, like the director is not telling us to be indifferent to that.
Right.
He's telling like he's indicating the sense of real frustration with everything being kind of upside down.
Yes.
That Xiao Si'r feels.
Yeah.
And we're able to sympathize with it.
Right.
Yes, and I think this also circles back on how the society at the time, this under the authoritarian rules, really infected almost every fabric of the societies. That we see the breakdown of the family, the father figures being emasculated, and then what that affects on the next generations. And also with like youth delinquency, how that was like putting on a blind eyes, and also we see how, because like in the end, what really breaks him is his best friend Ma betrayed him by befriending with the girl, because Ma, he come from this family of power. His dad was this like general or something, commander in the military, which gave him a privileged house, a privileged household to hire the mother of Ming,
an arsenal.
Yeah. So you really so I think this film really, because it's 4 hours long, it puts so much nuance on this that really makes you feel like you lived through that period under that high pressure society, and how that affects every fabric of your life.
Yes.
I mean, because like we see the breakdown of Sir. He started as this as this normal kid trying to do good in schools, and maybe there's some injustice with his first exam that his father trying to figure it out but couldn't, because like in the beginning his father trying to say we should re-examine the test that he took, but was refused. And then that's where he end up in the night school, dealing with other kids which are not as good as he is maybe, and end up with the gangs, trying to find this kind of sense of belonging because he couldn't find in other ways. And then we see, with the conflict between the gangs, there's also the gangs, like I mentioned, they are children from the soldiers, the militaries who's from China. Because the gang leader, his name is Shandong, which signals his family roots is in this Shandong. It's a north province in China. Probably a nickname for him. And how Honey obviously is a local kid, and then being just literally pushed away on the wheels of a car, and the very treacherous killing of Honey that also signals that a sort of a destruction of this idealist, in the society. And then his father beating down from this very upright moral guy and beating down into conformity. And I mean, I definitely agree this is a tragedy of it's the result of the circumstances that from that specific period and that specific society.
Yeah. And the film really gains something from its length. You mentioned this nuance and this sense that we're there every step of the way, and you feel it's like when the frog is being boiled in water, right? It's like you feel that, oh, something's changed, but like, when did it change? Oh, what's going on, And one other thing I'll mention is that for every act of violence, there's like 15 threats of violence. Like, violence is in the air that they're breathing, even if it's not something that's always being done on the daily. It's like there's always these threats to, I'm going to kick your butt or I'm going to kill you, and I think of this last interaction between Sir and his friend Ma. Ma, sort of is yelling at him as he's walking off, saying, I'm going to kill you. And it's like that when the temperature is up there like that, everything's dialed up, the rhetoric is dialed up, the threats are constantly happening. Something's going to give eventually, and we see how it does throughout the film. It sort of, explodes.
There's a religious element that comes into this film pretty late, which is the middle sister of Xiao Si'r's family. I don't even know her name, actually. She's you see her, but she's not really developed until towards the end of the film. And basically what we get about her is that she
is very Christian.
She's very Christian.
Yeah.
She participates in the choir. She goes to, Bible classes. And at a certain point, she counsels her brother to be less judgmental of others, to be more grateful for what other people have done for him, to pray to God, to think and contemplate his life. She's the one character. Is she the one character who kind of like really has a heart to heart with Sir about like who he is as a person? I mean, I guess the father encourages him to study and to stand up for principles and stuff like that. But
yeah.
Is she the only one who sort of like challenges him on a deeper level?
It seems so. Yeah.
One of the important moments at the end of the film is after Xiao Si'r has murdered Ming and has been arrested. We finally see her in her choir singing a Christian hymn about being safe in God's embrace and sort of weeping as she sings. I'm curious, Frank, what do you think that Christian stuff is doing there, and why? Is there kind of like just a bitter irony in that song? Or, is it sincere? Is it what are we supposed to sort of take away from that scene?
I do think I don't see it as irony. I do think this is almost like that scene is almost like a eulogy or some kind of elegy for Sir, that just reflects on because I definitely agree with you that sister is mostly almost like the only family members that Sir had that really kind of understand him to a certain degree, and also believe that the notes that they find on Sir, after he was arrested, was addressed to her. And also, I remember in the film that she encouraged him to go talk to this priest in the church, I believe, to trying to save him. I think that this character, I think it's really interesting because it also reflects the Christian influence in Taiwan at the time, because after they moved to Taiwan, and especially it was Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of Taiwan, aligned himself more towards America. There is this kind of Christian influence on Taiwan. Like Chiang Kai-shek himself and his wife converted to Christianity, I think, when they were even back in China at the time. So there is this kind of a Christian community presence in Taiwan. So I think that her character is sort of a reflection on that.
Yeah, we get one interaction with his sister where she sort of begins to say something to him, and he really completely dismisses her, like, don't talk to me she says something like, "You lack inner peace," and he's like, "Don't talk to me about that, your religious stuff."
Oh,
you know,
yeah, that's earlier.
so
yeah.
so he sort of dismisses her out of hand. So perhaps it's just that he's already kind of shut himself off to that, and that he's newly open only at the end when he's basically at rock bottom, and this is when she sees an opening to make this appeal to him.
Yeah.
You know,
I think the difference between what she says and, say, the stuff that his father or other authority figures might say about working hard or about, standing up for what's right is that she's the only one who encourages him to kind of like look into his inner self.
Yeah.
To like actually examine like the state of his soul essentially and his conscience, instead of just these sort of like external things like you must stand up for principles, you must work hard. She's the one who's inviting him to sort of like find out like the truth of his relationships with other people.
Yes, and I can't remember the lines exactly, but it seems to me like part of her thrust is that you can't do this alone, and that you need Jesus.
Yes.
She specifically mentions how Jesus died for our sins.
Yeah, she does,
Yeah,
so
and,
this
and
is
she put this comparison of his brother taking the blame for him, to take the beating from the father, and she uses as a comparison to talk about how Jesus took the sins of the world.
Yes, and so especially if what we're presented with earlier is sort of a typically Confucian kind of moralism, this emerges as the kind of counterpoint. Yes, someone can sort of take on. It can be an innocent victim, can take on another person's sins. And this, at the moment when Sir is most desperately in need of and desiring change in his life, and feeling that he's not able to accomplish it.
Yeah, and that also forms a contrast with Xiao Si'r's attitude, because he does kind of feel the weight of the world and everything that's wrong with the world on him. And like what right after Ming says, "I'm like the world," he literally kills her. Like he judges her and he stabs her.
Yes, right.
And so like
that's such a good
Jesus,
point.
did not come to judge the world, but he takes the sins of the world upon himself. And Xiao Si'r is like, I'm judging this and I'm like putting a stop to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and also it's really interesting because I believe like it's the same day that the sister says you should go talk to this priest. I've arranged a meeting for you with him. It's the same day that he didn't go to meet the priest and then instead went to the school to commit the murder.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely like you can say like what if he went to the meeting and maybe talked to the priest, maybe none of this would happen.
Right.
There's definitely a possibility of that.
Yeah, it has this sort of Shakespearean quality to it. This Romeo and Juliet, like, oh, if only the message had gotten to Romeo, or that maybe this could have been avoided.
Yeah, I mean, we even get the impression he told his family he was going to the priest, because she says the family says he's on his way, and instead he goes to ambush Mom.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, well, we should probably stop there, because we've said a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's a great film. There's so many other things we could have talked about that we didn't.
Yeah. Was there anything you wanted to add, Frank, before we sign off?
I think we talked pretty much all of it. I think I just want to add a little bit more about the Edward Yang's background.
Sure.
Because he didn't start it as a filmmaker. He didn't study film in film school. He actually first came to the United States studying electronic engineering, and as an engineer worked with Microsoft and other computer companies in the first part of his career, and then got really interested with films after he saw a Werner Herzog film. I think it was the Agir, the Wrath of God.
Wrath of God. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's the film that he
Wow.
Because he think that I think really changed his life. That
Oh,
after
dude,
seeing
what a
that
double
film,
feature would that be?
Yeah,
to watch A Brighter Summer Day.
Because he always has this kind of enthusiasm with films, but he just doesn't think he can make it. But after seeing that film, he think he can even with him with not any background, he can make that film. He can make movies. So basically his kind of engineering background going to film. It's something that's really interesting. And also, I would add on that this is not the only film that he directed ends up with a murder or killing. Almost like every single one of his film, the ending has something to do with killing or something like that. I think that's also, if you want to, watch more of his film, I definitely would recommend. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Frank, for joining us in this conversation. I think we knew that there were things that we weren't picking up on as we were watching this film, and you helped us to pick up on them.
Yeah, and also I think I just want to add it. I also, thank you so much for having me here. And, if you really like this film, and I would recommend Hou Xiaoxian's film that's sort of similar era also, in the early 60s and 70s called A Time to Live, A Time to Die. It's a sort of semi-biographic, autobiographic film about his youth, how he's growing up as a boy. Very different style, but has similar themes on, typical coming-of-age movies. One last thing to add, it was Edwin himself, I think he was like 14 years old when the actual case happened.
Yeah.
So he lived through that period.
Yeah.
So I think this film is very much also a reflection of his own youth.
Yeah, all right, that makes sense. Yeah, well, I'm super excited to get into more Chinese language films in the future, and if and when we do, it would be great to have you back on to talk about these films with us, Frank.
Yeah, I'll be happy to come back. And
Sweet.
This is a really great conversation with you guys.
And thank you for our listeners for hanging out, and I hope you check out this film. It's on the Criterion channel. Thanks to Criterion for putting this out. In 2015 was the first time it was ever released on home video in the U.S. So we have them to thank, just as with all the Kiarostami films we discussed recently, which were not available until recently either.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. It's an amazing time to be a movie lover, because there's so many wonderful things that we have access to at the tip of our fingers. It's a really privileged moment for watching movies.
Criteria is a production of CatholicCulture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Jim Papandrea, Catholic Culture audiobooks bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and the Catholic Culture Podcast, an interview show exploring Catholic arts, culture, and issues. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical resources, and much more at CatholicCulture.org.